The early 2000s were filled with innovation and change. Arguably, the most influential change was the creation of Disney's Toontown Online. Toontown, to most, may seem like just a children's game, something targeted towards people below the age of 12. And I'm here today to tell you that you're probably right, but Toontown also has some other themes that are buried a little below the surface. Toontown teaches us about society by mimicking it in a perfect fashion. First, we're going to dive into the setting of Toontown. The mayor of Toontown is Flippy Dogginbottom, but we never hear of anybody else involved in the Toon decision-making. This leads us to believe that the Toons live under a sort of unnoticed fascism, just like in the US. The Toons start their journey here in Toontown Central, where everything is overly green and pretty and oh my gosh, I hate it. This mimics the sugar-coated America we live in. Not only that, but the Toons are told what to do by the government with these things called Toon tasks. This mirrors our government, and how they force us to get a job and stuff. All the different places in Toontown represent some faction or idea of society. Alongside Toontown Central is Goofy Speedway. This represents reckless government spending on stuff that doesn't really matter. Donald's Dock represents the poor and middle class trying to get by but ultimately living in the dirt. Chippendale's Acorn Acres, which is branched from Donald's Dock, represents the rich aristocrats living off the expense of poor people right beside them. Daisy's Garden represents marijuana and the propaganda that follows. Minnie's Melodyland represents feminism because it's pink, it was named after a woman, and nobody really cares about it, let alone remember it. The Berg represents the idea of climate change, and Donald's Dreamland shows the dreams of the poor contrasting with Donald's Dock. Overall, the Toontown society is very capitalist, with its many locally owned shops and businesses just like ours. That isn't all though. Oh no. We still have to dive headfirst into the enemy of Toontown, the cogs. Now, literally, cogs are defined as a wheel or bar with a series of projections on its edge that transfers motion by engaging with projections on another wheel or bar. Now that has absolutely nothing to do with this video and it doesn't add anything, but it's cool to know, isn't it? Back on track, the cogs are a bunch of robot businessmen that invaded Toontown and want to drive out all the happiness. Now, already we are seeing the parallels to the real world. There are 4 different factions of cogs. Let's analyze each faction. Sellbots. These guys represent the modern day annoyance of salespeople and how one day we'll finally get to execute every single one of them. Cashbots. These ones represent greedy tycoons, robber barons, and Jews. As a matter of fact, one of them is literally called a robber baron. There isn't one called a Jew, though. Lawbots. These guys represent our insanely weak justice system and how we don't need one. And finally, we get to bossbots. These ones represent our hatred of bosses and leaders, because leaders suck. These enemies are symbolic for the problematic system and problematic people who deserve to be brutally murdered in today's world. But now, we get into how Toons defend themselves against cogs. They use weapons called gags. There are 7 different types of gags, each type having various options to choose from. Let's break them down. Tune-up. This represents the social justice warriors of the modern day. They heal you up when the enemies get you down, but always end up not being enough. Trap. This represents extremism. If you have the chance, get the enemy right where you want them and... Lure. This represents cults. They draw you in, don't let you out, and end up going hand in hand with extremism. Sound. This represents protesters. They're the loudest, most over the top, and actually have little effect compared to the other types. Throw. This represents the police force because the police force causes an overwhelming amount of brutality while doing their job, and totally might be too overpowered. Squirt. This represents bullies. Sometimes in the world you just gotta bully the crap out of someone and make it known that you don't like them, although this is much less effective than the police force. I know, it surprised me too. Finally, drop. Drop represents the internet. It can be quite destructive when it wants to, only that doesn't happen too often. It could be forums about bashing the government or 100% non-biased news sources pumping out informational stories to belittle the enemy. Whether it's Fox, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, LSD, or BuzzFeed. As a whole, Toontown is an exact allegory for this country's current state, from the animal testing effects represented in doodles, to the growing number of people desperately trying to find jobs and make money represented in fishing. Toontown is a game based on society, a game based on destroying horrible things like the lawyers and judges with the sheer force of the individual. It mimics our society, a fascist, depressing, separated society. Just kidding, it's a game, calm the hell down.